Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I am Susan Cowan. I'm a senior manager with Baker Tilly. And the purpose of today's meeting is to give an overview of the MUST process, how we envision a MUST working, whether we're working, the whole way through with Davies County, or if Davies County takes part of the reins themselves. I'm going to talk a little bit about this MUST process, what the changes to local income tax look like, and the decisions that will be facing the county going into changes when they, as of right now, they're supposed to start at the beginning of 2029. We don't know what the legislature will do, but we do know that there will be changes. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is purely an informational session today. We're not making any decisions about anything. There's no votes to be taken. This is just to decide, potentially give you information to decide whether you're going to go through with the MUST as a county. Just so I know who's here, would you mind going around the room and telling me what units are here? I assume we're county council here at the front of the room?
Commissioner.
Oh, commissioner. Okay, awesome. And here in the front row? Washington, okay. Okay, sir? Either way. Okay. 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 Okay, wonderful. Nice to see everyone here this morning. We'll start out with kind of three primary topics today. What is the MUST? Why was it created? Who created it? We'll go through your current local income tax framework, what the new framework looks like, and some of the decisions that will have to be made to transition to that framework. And then we'll discuss the potential recommended next steps. What happens? How do you go forward and form the MUST, and what happens going on? Go ahead, and another one, please. So the MUST is sort of it's unusual. It's a multi-unit strategic task force. It's a collaborative process that was established to evaluate local income tax structure for units, taking into account their funding priorities amongst all the local government units. This is sort of the first, it's an encouraging cross-county, all the units across the county to come together, to consider information, to consider what individual units needs, what are their top priorities, and how you look at those as a whole across the county to sort of make the county as a whole better. Now, it's somewhat unusual that this was put in place by legislation earlier this year in House Enrolled Act 1210. This came out of that. Last year there were large changes to local income tax in SEA 1. I think there was a lot of comment that came back to the legislature on some things that may not potentially be workable with that, things that was going to be too fast. So this is a way to sort of take a step back. First of all, they pushed the implementation date for the new lit rules back from January 1, 2028 to January 1, 2029. And in between, they're asking units to come together through this MUST to look at local income tax and provide comment. Now, the results are non-binding because we don't know what's going to happen in this coming year's legislative session. We don't know what changes will be put in place. But this is a way for the units to come together and to determine what might be best for the county, what rate looks best for the county, what rate looks best for the units. Can we make everybody whole? How exactly will this work based upon the boundaries that are currently in place for local income tax to start in 2029? So you'll come together as a group. Ideally, the participants are a representative from the county council and the clerk, fiscal officers, so that would be clerk treasurers or controllers from each of the municipalities. So as a group, those would be the voting members. So the townships aren't included as voting members, libraries aren't included as voting members, but we strongly encourage you to invite all of those units to each of the meetings that are held to get, you can ask for input, you can ask for, because there may be relationships there that aren't immediately, apparent to everybody. There may be some fire contracts. There may be other sort of support roles between townships and communities, maybe, or communities and libraries, or, and there's any number of different type of relationships that may not be immediately aware of on the surface. And that until you can find out what everybody's sort of standpoint is, where they come to this, and when you're talking about changes to revenue, like local income tax, what those objectives might be for each community, those inputs are very, very helpful. So at the end of the process, you'll put together a report, say, hey, this is what looks the best for Davies County. This is what we have determined looks the best. You can sort of, if you want to, if something here does not work for you, for example, there is no provision going forward in local income tax for schools. Schools in Davies County currently do receive a portion of local income tax. That may be one of the comments from this group, is we want the ability to continue to support our schools with local income tax. That may be the comment. It may be the fact that you think that the restrictions on potentially the township lit or the library lit is too restrictive. You want the ability to change things there. So just because something isn't currently legislatively available to you, you shouldn't exclude it from your comments in the report that gets put together and sent to the state. Because what will happen is this report will be submitted, it then will get presented to legislators next year during the next, which is a biennial budget session next year. So it will be a long session, and we expect a number of different things to come out of that. But these reports are to give legislators an insight to what works for you and what doesn't work for you. We have 92 different counties in Indiana. No one county has the same exact challenges and requirements that another county does. So it's not to say 100% that what you submit obviously will be taken, will be put into final law. But I think that by asking for this, which this is kind of unheard of, to ask for this widespread comment on something like this, that they're at least asking and would like to know what local opinions are. Go on to the next one. So as stated previously, this came out this year out of House Enrolled Act 1210. And this is, normally for local income tax, the decision has always been either a county lit council or specifically just the county council. This is the first time when they're asking units to take input or to provide input to the county council going forward, so that the county council gets a good idea too of what happens in the communities and what their needs might be. Because technically, yes, it will still be in 2029. The bulk of the decisions would be made by the county council. There is the opportunity for the city of Washington to make their own decision about a portion of lit for them. But for the libraries, for the townships, for fire protection, for the county rate, that all still lies with the county council. But again, how those pieces all work together to stay within the rate caps, this is an opportunity where you can discuss those options, see how those options fit together, and how they work to help everybody get to a decision. Ideally, the members that take part will be able to come to a unanimous decision. We ask that even if you can't come to a unanimous decision, we still would like to see the report submitted to the state with an explanation of why. Why was everyone not able to come to a decision? Or if not everyone participates, what were the limits to participation? Was it that this timeline was too short? Was it, or were there other reasons to why things didn't work well going forward? Sure.
Are the lit funds going?
I'm going to discuss that whole change in schema here in a couple slides. So there are changes. There's distribution changes. There's lit type changes. There's AGI pool changes. There's a lot of changes. So yes, I will go over those in detail in just a moment. You can go on to the next slide. So we believe that this is important because it's more than just a tax decision. This framework could change how you get along as a county, how the units work together going forward. We see potential for this to be maybe sort of a long-term effort for economic development, for the communities to come together with the county to discuss planning for future long-term opportunities. It's a way to align your tax policy with infrastructure and investment, economic development and maybe service delivery. There may be, out of these discussions, you find that there's a new way to deliver a service currently, or a new way to provide a service. But, you know, since it does say the unanimity, being unanimous, is a requirement, that's where collaboration really becomes the key to all of this. People willing to work together and collaborate for the larger county, obviously while advocating for each of your individual units. So in this process, we recommend the earlier stakeholders begin working together, the better. The legislation says that you should form the MUST by October 1st, which is, we think, kind of late in the game, personally, Baker Tilly. This process, depending upon how many meetings you need to have, could be 8 to 12 weeks, depending upon how frequently everyone get together, how frequently you can decide things. So if you're not starting until October 1st, you're running up against that December 1st deadline to submit the information to the Legislative Services Agency. So that if you start earlier, like by the middle of August, or at the latest, maybe by the beginning of September, that will give you more time to not feel rushed as a group to put things together to get that report developed and sent to Legislative Services. Okay, the next one. So as I mentioned, the membership includes somebody from the county council, and then a fiscal officer from each of the municipalities. So that would be the clerk, Washington City, and then each of the other municipalities, regardless of population, regardless of size of municipality. If you're a municipality that's currently receiving local income tax, you would be on that MUST task force board. So again, stressing the importance of even those other units, if they're not voting members, they're still stakeholders, and their input is very important throughout the process. We recommend you define some sort of governance structure, maybe in the first formal meeting after you've decided to form the MUST, such as how will votes work. We recommend someone take minutes each meeting. Who's that? We recommend that maybe you come together with a formal document of how you're going to run the meetings. Will you allow comment at each meeting from municipal units? Will you not allow comment? Will you set one meeting for comments from your other municipal units? Exactly how would that work? So that's part of the governance structure once you've decided to form. Also, how often are you going to have meetings? Is everybody available every 2 weeks, or is everybody only going to be available every 3 weeks or a month, or can somebody not attend all meetings? Also, to determine if anything is being voted on, since the structure says it should be council and fiscal officers, can someone attend meetings to gain information in proxy of one of those individuals? For example, if a clerk treasurer can't be there, can she send a council member or a deputy to take notes and then take information back to her? You know, that we don't see an issue with. There's just, when it says voting should be, we don't believe proxy voting would be available. But again, just, you know, discussing those things to make the process as clear and transparent as possible to not only the units taking part, but the other units that would be providing information as well. The next slide, please. Yes, so this is the MUST task force model. Again, this sort of details who's taking part, at which point, what the actions are, what the objective or the outcome is. So again, today is just information. It's just to provide information, to sort of plant the seed, to think about how do you want this to work in Daviess County. Then that first formal meeting, that would be sort of your pre-formation coordination. The next meeting, step 2, would be deciding who's taking part, who's forming the MUST. You create that forum for collaboration. Then we start with financial modeling and scenarios. Like at a very base level, what do the scenarios look like? Really, for Daviess County, you'll have sort of 2 broad options. One is if the city of Washington chooses to opt in, or to the county one, there would be one countywide rate. If, however, the city of Washington would choose to adopt its own, you would then have a rate for everyone in the city of Washington, and then a rate for everyone outside the city of Washington. So you have, and then within each of those pieces, then there's moving parts. What's the rate that Washington would adopt? What's the rate that the county council would adopt for townships and libraries? What's the rate that they would adopt for small municipalities? Is there going to be a rate for fire and EMS? So there's changes, to each of those pieces, but you would generally have two scenarios to consider in the process as you go forward from there. And then eventually, you would get to the point where the task force will negotiate for potential agreement on those scenarios and which works best. So the process is definitely intended to be transparent, structured, and data-driven. You can go on to the next one then after this. So this slide is a description of your current local income tax structure in Davies County. You have in place certified shares and economic development lit. You also have something called property tax relief credits, or PTRC. So the top two pieces, the certified shares and economic development, are what is called expenditure rate lit. Those can be put in place at a maximum rate of 2.5%. So you are at 50% capacity on your current local income tax rate for the certified shares and economic development. You currently have a 1% rate for certified shares. That brings in roughly 11.3 million across the county. And there's a list of the units that receive that. There's county, townships, municipalities, libraries, fire districts, solid waste management district, and schools. So virtually all the taxing units in the county receive certified shares lit currently. The next type, that economic development, that goes only to the county and the municipalities. So the city of Washington and then Odin, the other communities across the county. That's at 0.25%. That's almost $3 million currently for your economic development. These are all based upon 2026 certified numbers. 2027 certified numbers will be coming out soon, but for right now, our estimates are based on 2026. So what that means, actually, let me talk about PTRC first. So PTRC is not as readily apparent as the other two parts. You don't get a monthly distribution of your PTRC. PTRC is calculated and distributed twice a year in property tax settlements. It actually comes back to units looking like property tax. So on tax bills, your taxpayers receive a credit, what they call a local income tax credit. So say, for example, it's $200 based upon how their property tax bill calculates. During the settlement point, that $200 comes from this pool of PTRC lit that's been collected and is then divided up based upon relative proportion for how the tax rate is calculated. So if Washington City their rate is 45% of a given tax district's tax rate, then 45% of that $200 would go back to the city of Washington, but it looks like it's property tax, even though it's local income tax. So you're using local income tax to sort of dull the impacts of circuit breaker. Whereas otherwise, maybe you would have not collected that $200 at all if you didn't have PTRC in place. Now the $200 is collected and then divided up amongst the units that make up, the district tax rate for that particular property. So that adds the other 0.25%. That's where we're coming up with the 1.5 total for the county's current lit rate. That's a total of about $17 million that gets distributed back. So that those two clear distributions and certified shares and economic development, and then the property tax relief that comes back looking like property tax. So what that calculation tells us is that there's currently an adjusted gross income in Davies County. That means wages, salaries for everyone across the county of a little over $1.1 billion. So that adjusted gross income, that's the tax base that lit rate is calculated against to come up with the amounts that are then distributed for local income tax. So, keeping these sort of amounts in mind going forward is going to be part of the must teams or the must task force's goals. What is your goal? Is your goal to be revenue neutral? Is your goal to be tax rate neutral? Not put a new lit back in place that's any more than this. And if you do that, what do the revenues look like? how do those all balance out? For example, from the point of view of the county, they currently they have a $21 million general fund budget. 8.8 of that is funded with local income tax. So that's a significant chunk of the county general fund budget. So as they're looking, they're going to be considered with how much do we have to put in place to get back to that amount? And where do we get close? And if we have to take PTRC into account, then there's also the other impacts of SEA 1, increased circuit breaker, as we go on down into 2030, 2031, 2032. There's a lot of different numbers there to look at and things to weigh. Also, when we take PTRC into account, that doesn't affect just the general fund. That affects any fund that gets property tax. So in the county's case, again, that affects their reassessment fund, their cumulative bridge fund, their health fund, their aviation fund. So if that PTRC goes away, you're going to draw revenue away from those funds. Also, currently, this lit is distributed based upon relative proportion of levy. It's the top two pieces are, I should say. So if a smaller municipality has 10% of all of the levy in the county, they would then receive more or less 10% of the certified shares. And then if, when we pull out townships, we pull out libraries, or pull out schools, in the economic development calculation, maybe they have 15%. They would then receive 15% of the economic development. So it's all based upon relative proportion of levy. The new formula for lit also changed that. We're now going by population instead of relative proportion of levy. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So the new local income tax structure not only changes the type, it changes the distribution. Currently we have, like I said, certified shares, there's economic development. You also would have something called public safety lit, which Davies County doesn't have in place. That's in support of fire and police. There are other numerous types of local income tax that just the county could receive. They are currently not. Going forward, there are 4 basic pots of local income tax. And it's more based upon the type of unit you are than what you're going to do with it, and when we're talking about who gets what. So there's now a county services pot that will just go to the county. It's not shared across any of the other units. There's a fire and EMS rate. That goes to fire providers and EMS providers. There's non-municipal units. Those would be townships, libraries. Since your solid waste management district currently receives local income tax, they would be eligible to be one of the types under that non-municipal lit going forward. And then there's also municipal lit. If a community has 3,500 people or more population-wise, they can adopt their own rate, which would be the city of Washington, or they can also choose to opt into a county rate. The main consideration there would be if the city of Washington would choose to adopt its own rate, it would only be upon the AGI applicable to the city of Washington. So only the people that live within the boundaries of the city of Washington would be that AGI base. Then for everyone else in the county, it would be that total, I said almost 1.1 billion, less whatever the amount is for the city of Washington. That's what it would be calculated on for all of the other smaller communities, individuals that live in the townships. That's how we would come to that second. Right, remember too, AGI, and that base depends upon where you live, not where you work. So if someone in Davies County works over in Martin County or works down in Princeton or something like that, their local income tax comes back to Davies County for distribution. Conversely, if somebody that lives in Princeton works here, their money goes back to Gibson County with them. So this sort of makes this stress on local income tax is if you're going to have businesses here, have your people locally work in your businesses ideally. So that can kind of change some of the function there, because it's always been, make sure we just bring the businesses in, that's, we want the assessed value. Now the stress will veer you more towards we want the AGI in the county instead. So that first pot The county services rate can be at up to 1.2%. That is across all the AGI of the entire county. The fire and EMS is a 0.4% rate. The county has a lot of leeway with what they decide to do with fire and EMS. The previous version last year of the legislation, SEA 1, had a very strict formula that you had to follow to determine how that would be distributed. This year it was changed so that still the primary recipients are going to be municipal fire departments, so the City of Washington's fire department, fire districts, or fire territories. You currently have some fire districts in place. They would be the top of that list. Township fire departments, volunteer fire departments could also receive that money, but they're not automatically guaranteed that money under this new structure. Again, that would be the county council's decision to make, how much they would give to those smaller fire departments. The county can also make the decision that they want to keep a portion of it off the top to pay for their county ambulance contract with Davies County EMS, because this is for fire and EMS, not just fire. So first of all, the county can decide if they want to keep a portion off the top for EMS providers, and then they get to decide based upon whatever formula they deem appropriate between service territory and population, how they will distribute this fire and EMS local income tax. And then two, do they want to give it to townships, and do you want to give it to volunteer departments, or do you want to figure out a way to give it to your municipalities to get to your volunteer fire departments or something along those lines? So the county has some decisions. Then they'll need information from the current fire providers to determine probably what the best distribution formula would be for that. Then you have the non-municipal units. So this is, like I said, townships, libraries, your solid waste district can be considered a non-municipal unit. Schools are not non-municipal units. Those fire districts are not non-municipal units because they're considered under the fire and EMS distribution. So the max rate on the non-municipal is 0.2%. You can't just give that 0.2% directly to one type of unit. So as a group, the townships may only receive a maximum of 0.5% total to all townships of that 0.2%. So it has to be divided by 4. You could divide it by more ways than that if you had enough units, but I think in this county, you have 3 potential ways to distribute it. So you can give the townships as a pool up to 0.5%. You can give the libraries as a pool up to 0.5%. You can give your solid waste management up to 0.5%. You may not want to give them a full 0.5%. That depends on what the estimates look like for distribution. But you can't take and say, well, we only have 2 types, so I just want to divide it in 2, or I want to divide it in 3. The legislation clearly says it can't be more than 0.5% per type of non-municipal unit. In some cases, we're finding out that, if there's one library in the county makes out well. If there's 2, 3, 4, sometimes not everybody can remain revenue neutral to where they were before. And the same thing maybe with townships too. Depends on the base, it depends on the size of the townships. These are combined. Yes, these are all combined. So the maximum combined rate is 2.9%. So the last option is the municipal rate. As I referenced earlier, Washington is the only community in the county that has the ability to adopt its own rate, knowing that it will be just upon the AGI of the City of Washington. If, however, Washington decided they would rather, through this process, determine they can reach an agreement that they could go into the full countywide rate, then they would be part of a base rate that would go across the whole county for municipalities. And again, that is going to be distributed based upon population. Now, and there is part of that calculation where some of that municipal lit will also go to the county lit, or to the county as well. So in addition to the county's county rate only, they get a portion of the municipal rate. Then if they're going to also choose to keep EMS from the fire, they also get a portion of the fire lit. So that's the different pieces that would go into the county. And the same with a municipality. You may get a city of Washington, for example, whether they have their own lit or whether they go in with a pool across the whole county, they would also be, if fire and EMS lit is put into place, they would also be a recipient of that. So how do all those pieces come together to make these individual units and individual services whole at the end of the day? Those are the important considerations. And then, like I said, each one of these together, when you add them all up, they can't be more than 2.9%. Yes?
City of Washington. So,
Mm-hmm.
their services,
If the city of Washington decides to do its own lit, they could get their rate that they put in place, plus they also would get a portion of fire and EMS if fire and EMS is put in place. Yes, yes, because they have a city fire department, and the legislation says that it's city fire departments, districts, and territories that get that.
come out.
Yeah, it would come out of,
County district.
it would come out of this pool. This pool would be fire, and then this, if the city does just their own, it would be this one.
Thank you.
Sure. So I know there's a lot of different moving pieces here, and that's kind of the hard thing that you have to put together. So, and technically, if the city of Washington adopts the whole 1.2, the county adopts maximums on everything they have, and that puts you over the 2.9%. It's not up to the city of Washington to cut their 1.2. It would be up to the county to determine how they would make everything. Now that's, you know, you're not at the max now. You may not have to go to the max. So you may not even have considerations of hitting that 2.9, depending upon the determination of what the county needs, what the other municipalities need to be whole or revenue neutral or wherever that comes in. You may not have to go to the full rate. Because if you think about currently what the county receives, certified shares, is a tax rate divvied up across everybody, all the units in the county. Now we're going to a county rate that's on the AGI of the entire county that they keep for themselves under that first column. So there are questions about, well, what is Washington's AGI? Right, currently, Indiana doesn't keep those. Our Department of Revenue does not keep those calculations. We have estimates based upon census data, and it's our understanding that the Department of Revenue is working on those calculations, because it's gonna be like literally on a street by street, address by address calculation to determine what that AGI is. Now, I don't know if this is true. Our last understanding was they've been working on it since last year, and there are 2 counties complete. I don't know for 100% that that's true, but that's what we have heard. It's going to take a significant amount of time for them to get to this point where they can say, okay, Washington, if you're gonna do your own rate, here's your AGI. Or, you know, the county is easy. We know that's how we have things right now. Since the rates currently are based on AGI of the whole county, this new schema where we're potentially dividing up municipal versus whole county, that's what's gonna take a while for the Department of Revenue to get to that point. Go ahead to the next slide. So this slide, I've attempted to take the units currently. I've looked at fire, and forgive me if some of the fire assumptions are wrong. I did the best I could looking in about 3 different places. But these as units would be available for each one. So, you know, the county services is county only. Municipal fire, or the EMS lid, fire and EMS, we have the chunk of municipal fire, that would be the city of Washington. This group down here, currently, Southeast and Veal are your 2 districts. Those would be the 2 guaranteed for distribution under fire and EMS. This group would be at the discretion of the council as they're putting the pieces together. And then this would be also at the discretion of the council to determine if they're going to pull a portion out to assist in payment for their county EMS contract. And then here we have the different distributions for township, libraries, and then your county solid waste. And then again, reminder, for that, under that municipal services lit calculation, the county receives a portion, then otherwise it would be divided by at least Alfredsville, Campbellsburg, Plainville, Elnora, Montgomery, and Odin. And if the city of Washington chose to opt in, they would be included there too. And then out here in the over 3,500 municipals, Washington's by itself. So part of the determination may be with that 0.5% that goes to the townships, can they continue to support fire service without doing some distribution here based upon current volunteer fire departments and township fire departments? Because schools are not part of the new legislation at all. Like I said, if in discussions on the task force, if they determine that's important to them to continue to do that, that would be a recommendation, but currently there's not a way for them to give to the schools. So the schools do currently receive certified shares, but under the new, unless they change it, it does not include schools. I think I've already touched on some of the things. If you can go ahead to the next slide. I've already touched on some of the things that changed in SEA 1. So this slide may be more in summary. So we bumped implementation back from 1/1/28 to 1/1/29. So that means as of right now, decisions will need to be made the summer of 2028 by October 1st, 2028 for what the rates will be in 2029. Previously, there was a restriction on which large municipalities could opt into the countywide rate. Previously, it was capped at 7,500 people. Now it's a municipality of any size can opt in. So that's why Washington is now eligible to opt into a countywide municipal rate. As it stands now, the first year the rate is adopted, it will be in place for 3 years. After that, it will have to be adopted annually. So if Washington's gonna have their own rate and the county's gonna have their own rate, that's what the decision for the first go-round, that will be in place for 3 years. If at the end of 3 years, Washington decides this isn't working for us, we would like to opt into the county rate, then there'll probably be some discussions back to the drawing board to determine how Washington fits into that and what the rate would be then if you included Washington in the municipal rate. So just because you opt or make a decision the first time, you can change the decision on the municipal setup the second, at the end of that first 3 years, and then every year after that going forward. Like I said, for the fire and EMS lit previously, there was a very complicated formula of how it had to be distributed. Now it's population, it's service territory. The council gets to decide whether it's 50% population, 50% service territory, how much you're gonna pull off the top for EMS, or are we gonna just make it 100% based on population and not look at service territory, or vice versa, and how that would work. So there's more leniency, a little bit more freedom with determining how that fire and EMS lit will be adopted going forward. Go to the next. So this next slide is an attempt to, this sort of would define the scenarios you would have available here in Daviess County potentially. So we've got 3 different ratepayers here. So in the first, City A, that's for somebody that's with a population of 3,499 or more. Their rate is 2.9% because the county has put into place a rate of 1.2. The county has also adopted 0.4% of fire and EMS. They put half of the eligible 0.2 in place for the non-municipal, so they probably just had townships and libraries. They didn't adopt anything relative to municipalities over 3,500 in this case, the municipality decided not to opt in. So the rate they've put in place for municipalities under 3,500 is 1.2. Or I'm sorry, I said that wrong. This is for this municipality that's over 3,500. So this unit had to go to the max rate to get what it needed, and then the county also went to the max rates for the ones that it had oversight for. So somebody in the municipality, their rate is gonna be 2.9%. So for the other ones, for Town B, it's a small unit, it's under 3,500, and then we have somebody that lives out in the townships. So they're not gonna be subject to that rate for the municipality that's over 3,500 people. They'll only be subject to the rates that the county puts in place for the 1.2% county services, the 0.4 fire and EMS, the 0.1% for the non-municipals, and then they put 0.6% or 0.6% in place for the small municipals. So if you live in any other small municipality in the county or in the townships, the lit rate in this case is 2.3%. So here's where we're talking about two different scenarios. People that live in the municipality would pay more than the individuals that live in the county. So that is partially, or could potentially drive determination, where are people going to move, or where are people going to live? Are they going to choose to move out of the city and move to the county? You know, again, some of those things may not be, happen immediately, but they're considerations or things to think about when the rates are being defined. Go ahead and go to the next one. So, I mean, regardless of what happens, there's likely going to be, you know, changes. There's going to be change in revenue somewhere at some point. So how do you respond, you know, as units going forward to those changes? You may want to look at things like, or part of this process, you may determine that there's some new opportunity for governmental consolidation or shared services of some point. You know, exploring interlocal agreements. Can one community help another community with services in some way or another? Can you reduce duplications? Can you improve service delivery and efficiency? There's also potentially operational and efficiency studies. Maybe when you know, analyze the workforce for the municipality or for the county, determine where potential savings might be. We're not saying make decisions to hire everybody or lay a bunch of people off, but are there plans where in the future, based upon potentially attrition or a combination of services or a combination of positions, you could achieve better efficiencies to help in the face of potential revenue decreases? This could help with long-term financial planning. It makes long-term planning more important. If your communities aren't currently doing at least 3 to 5 year financial plans, this may help encourage them to do so, because if they don't know what position under current circumstances they will look like in 29 or 30, this could be a complete shock to them when it actually happens. So that long-term financial idea of, and those goals of having a plan to say, well, if things continue the way they are, by 29 we'll be here. Knowing that if in 29 something changes and they have less, then what do they need to respond to? That can be very important, along with long-term capital planning, knowing what your big projects are coming up, knowing when the next fleet replacement needs to be. If, for example, a municipal needs to buy new police cars every 5 years, and 2029 is going to be the next year they have to buy cars, are they going to have enough with the lit that's coming in, if that's what they've always used? We know that especially a lot of townships use their local income tax for fire service contracts. So what happens in 2029 to their fire service contracts if they're going to receive potentially half the lit they did before, or based upon the structure, they can't receive the amount that they're used to receiving. So those long-term plans become more important in the face of these revenue changes. This may even lead to regional changes. It may need to, you can work more with Martin County on something than you have previously, or there's just a number of different things that could come out of this, a number of questions, a number of leads or ways, things that could change in the future. It may change economic development. You know, if you're trying to keep that structure where you have one rate across the whole county, bringing in a manufacturer that's going to provide jobs and helping focus on, you know, making those jobs people from Davies County will help your AGI base, will help your local income tax revenues down the road and long term. But the must is really it's a good way to start thinking about across the county collaboration rather than just individual units and how individual units come together. Okay, you can go on 2 more. So, going forward, what are the decisions? So first, ideally, you'll make a decision to form a must. Again, you would have to have each, ideally, county council representative, somebody from the city of Washington, then from Alfredsville, from Kennelberg, the clerk treasurer from each of those units, and finalize that roster. As I mentioned earlier, you have to convene per the legislation by October 1st. We would recommend now rather than later. We know that some units have indicated they would like to wait to get lit estimates that come out in July. That's not going to give you a drastic difference from what you have now. If you think about your lit, if it goes up 2 to 3% a year, that's 2 to 3% different. That may not make a huge difference in whether the county adopts 0.6% or 0.7%. But right now, getting your hands and your minds around what this new structure looks like and how the individual pieces fit together are really the more important piece than having exact estimates, because we're still not gonna have exact estimates for 2029. You're gonna have 2027, which will give you a little bit step closer, but still doesn't get you to the end. So waiting will not get you better data at this point. So starting now is completely appropriate using 2026 assumptions. Sure. We are suggesting, yes, that you have them fall under a public meeting so you don't run into any open door requirements. We don't know for sure. I mean, the must body itself would not fall under open door, but if an entire city council or town council showed up, or all of the county council members are in one place at one time, that would count as an open door requirement. So we recommend that each of the meetings have a general public notice that Davies County is hosting a public meeting at this date at this time, and there will be, attendance from elected officials across the county, just so that you don't run into those. There's no recording requirement for the must, but if you choose to, we certainly would recommend, again, for transparency, you can, and, if it's a public meeting, technically the public can show up. Now, whether you invite the public to comment, that's up to you, because it's not a public hearing, it's a public meeting. We would recommend that the task force entertain comment from municipal units, but whether or not you chose to take public comment would be totally under the purview of the task force and what they choose. Like, they may, for example, say the last meeting, they're gonna take public comment or something, but up until that point, you should, hear from or take questions from your townships, your schools, whoever, would show up at those meetings. So yeah, just simply by noticing a meeting, you would be within open door requirements. We'd hate to run afoul of something because of that, so yes, definitely. So the next step also, once you determine if everybody's gonna take part, what their availability is, when you schedule that first meeting and start looking at scenario estimates. What does it look like revenue-wise if everything is at the max? What does it look like revenue-wise if we try to keep your current 1.5% rate in place, based upon all the different pieces and how that would look? Then, as you step into it, you go through the negotiation process, you're looking at the allocation within each of those. Who ends up ahead, who ends up short, how can that be changed, where does the county come in versus for those different pieces, especially in the municipal rates, because the county, like I said, gets a part if Washington takes part. They also get a part if Washington doesn't take part, but it changes amount fairly significantly. So that's part of the scenarios, the negotiation process as you step through in future meetings. Like I said, we recommend that you take minutes of each meeting so that it's, again, transparent, not to say that they have to be turned in, but you can keep them for posterity's sake so you know who attended, who took part, how things went. But ultimately, the goal is developing recommendations that can be put together and submitted to the DLGF and the Legislative Services Administration by December 1st. So this is just a sample potential timeline of how things might work. If your group wants to be ambitious and shorten it, you can do that. This is about a 15-week timeline total, which looks kind of imposing. If you want to try to keep it to 3 meetings, if you want to try to accomplish more in one meeting, that's totally up to the group as they come together. We recommend keeping meetings to 1 hour to 2 hours. After 2 hours, people kind of get weary and, contentious. So if you could keep, especially when you're in the discussion stages, and also when you get to the places where you're being given scenarios, you're gonna have a lot of numbers to look at. And, that can be a lot as well to figure all that out. So we have the pre-work priority, we have scenario modeling, negotiations, and then that final submission step for putting the report together to get it sent in. Go ahead to the final report's supposed to be submitted by December 1st. So if you can wrap everything up early October, that gives you a couple months, or even middle of October, you have 6 weeks to get everything put together in a report form and to get sent in time. So I've already hit on a number of these items on this slide. You know, this could potentially be a long-term planning body across the county for those potential opportunities that come out of these discussions. Because it doesn't have to focus just on local income tax going forward. You could find that this is a valuable exercise, and it could be good for other things, like I said, you know, economic development efforts, even if it comes down to debt capacity and infrastructure planning. You know, so that way you know what units are planning to potentially have to issue debt, because, you know, one unit issues debt, it affects the other units in the county, especially now with the PTRC and circuit breaker, and it, you know, what one does affects everybody else. Okay. So here's how we envision the negotiation framework. So even though we are stressing collaboration throughout the process, we know that each unit can't come to the table and ignore their own issues and their own priorities and what their non-negotiables are. So that's what each unit should have a clear idea of before you start the process. What is important to you? Is it 100% maintaining revenue? Likely that's going to be one of your things. But then what are other what is an acceptable outcome? If you're not at 100%, if you're not quite 100% with municipal, but you get some fire support because you have a fire department, is that helpful? Or you will not have to have a fire payment in the future because maybe there's a fire district that's going to go in place or something along those lines. So knowing those things up front, knowing what's important to your community, what your future looks like as a community and how it fits into this is a necessary part of your initial education and research before you come to the table. And then again, is it all going to be revenue neutrality? Is it going to be rate neutrality? And then if so, are we going to look at circuit breaker and what circuit breaker is going to do? Is that going to be part of our revenue neutral definition, or are we just going to look at local income tax? How exactly are we going to consider this? I mean, we can facilitate. We haven't been engaged by the county or any unit specifically yet, but Baker Tilly can help with those scenarios. We envision having the ability to do live scenarios in future meetings if it comes to that. The modeling and assumptions can hopefully negate misinformation. We find out, you know, when you live in this world of talking about legislation all the time, you think everybody understands what the changes are going to be to local income tax. And then you come to these meetings and you find out that a lot of people don't understand what it's going to be, or they are making false assumptions. I've heard one community, the minute that they heard lit was changing, they laid off 2 people from their marshal's department because they just knew that they were not going to have any money. Well, that was before they even came and talked to the county council about how it worked, or before, you know, any of these must talks have started. So to hopefully keep units from making, you know, any future rash decisions based upon lack of information, this goal would be to provide information so that they know what to anticipate going forward, and that everybody's got the same information at the same playing field and they understand it. And then facilitating consensus, you know, that's really the goal here, is consensus and collaboration. But, you know, phasing into that, we believe, is the important step. Go ahead to the next one. Oh, we already did. So these are just some questions to ask yourselves as you're thinking about our future discussion points for meetings. So what are the shared priorities across all the county stakeholders? How should equity and revenue stability be balanced across municipalities? Because as I mentioned, you may not be able to get revenue equity for your non-municipal units. Somebody may come out well ahead while somebody else is behind, or to get somebody to the point that they need to be, somebody else is way, way over what they need to be. So you've got to determine that balance is an important question and an important thing to look at. What level of municipal autonomy is appropriate? So, you know, is it appropriate, is it the best decision for Washington to do their own thing, or does something else make better sense for the county as a whole or for just the city? Are there additional assumptions or projections that need to be incorporated into financial modeling? Like I said, if you decide you want to help make up the gap for circuit breaker in 2030 and 31, 32, that's another piece of this calculation. And then as a task force, what is the best governance structure? What rules work best for the group? I know we've had some questions along the way, but that's the end of my presentation. Does anybody have other questions?
you talk to him a little bit about the model that the auditor's office has, the software model they have?
Right, so the software model that the auditor's office has is it's from the AIC. Because of the way it's been structured, each county has one license. We've only seen visuals. I can't speak to exactly the calculation. We are on the assumption that it's based similarly to our assumptions on how that, keeping within the guardrails of how things are currently set up, that they define, and I think the AIM model that municipalities have received is the same. I do know that AIM's numbers are based upon 2024 lit for some reason. We're using 2026. I believe AIC is using 2026 in theirs also. But just based upon, they're trying to give you a good idea up front of what units are currently receiving, and then under the new rules and the new percentages, what would they receive? Say, so if you just look at townships as a whole, if you give them the whole 0.5%, where are they compared to what they get now? So again, we're looking at, what would they get in 2029 compared to now? So in some cases it looks okay, some cases it doesn't. But those, like I said, having not seen their model completely, that's the way that, what I've seen, that's how it looks. So, but again, you can put different percentages in at different points, so you can put in a 0.6% for municipals and see how that allocates. You can include Washington or exclude Washington in that calculation. You can determine, are you just gonna do municipal fire and fire districts on your fire and EMS? So there's a lot of different, pieces and parts in that model. And until I actually could get a printout and look at it, but our understanding is it's very close to the model that we would have in place as well.
So with that model that we have, we can do a lot of those calculations. How does it help the city of Washington determine what they want to do going forward? Do they have similar software and models that you guys?
AIM has something similar. AIM has reports. They don't have a model that they have provided to Washington. So, but I believe in AIC's model, it identifies what units would be at that 3,500 or above,
Gotcha.
and whether they are included at their own or whether they're part of the municipal rate that the county would adopt. That flexibility appears to be there from what I've seen.
Gotcha. Just want to make sure that, the value's there for both to move forward or whatever that is. Right.
Yes, and we don't,
It really is.
that, I will say, I don't know how the AIC did their AGI calculation. We used 2020 census data, looked at county, what they have for salary and wage data as a whole, then looked at what salary and wage data was assigned to the city of Washington, and determined that as a proportion for the AGI for the city of Washington there. We then also used sort of an allowance based upon whether it was increased or decreased based upon the county as a whole, and made a determination there. And I would assume that in working with Policy Analytics, AGI, that they're doing something similar with AIC. But right now, that's the best information we have, since the Department of Revenue doesn't have that available for us. Now, like I said, to the best of our knowledge, they've got 2 counties done in a year. They've got to come up with a faster way to do it, or it's not going to be ready at all by 2029. They're very tight-lipped about it, so they may be further ahead, but they're just not telling anybody because they don't want to create expectations or get questions but so unfortunately, I can't address when that will be ready as a whole. It is a very important part. Yes, it's a very important part of this. Definitely. Anything else? So I guess it would be up to the county then to, get indications from people whether other communities are going to take part, whether the county is going to do this by themselves, if the other municipalities aren't going to be, included, or how this is going to work. So I don't know if you want to set a date to ask people to respond, or how exactly you want to handle that, but that's probably the discussions there locally to determine that.
Yeah, I think we want to do it fairly quickly. So we don't want to wait till the deadline. We want lots of discussion. So we'll get moving on it.
Okay?
Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you for attending today.
Matt or Tom, do you guys have anything else that you need to, want to share, or we?
I really don't at this time, unless you do, you can distribute to the participants.
Okay,
Go
yep.
from there. I just want to kind of
Oh, yeah,
take in all the knowledge and then move forward from there, but it'll be quickly. So, yeah. Thank you, everybody, for your time. We got a lot to do there.